Okay guys, it's patch 6.14 rundown, so we're going to check out what's going on. Alright, so first and foremost is Ryze. So the Ryze update is live in this patch. The problem with Ryze is I know that in Korea he was speculated as possibly now being a support champion. Oh, hold on, my contacts. Oh, my contacts hurt. I have hard contact lenses. For those that don't know, I can't wear glasses because I have an eye disease. So only hard contact lenses work because I have keratoconus. Anyways, okay, so I know in Korea there was speculation that Ryze might end up being a support with his new remake, and that's primarily because of his new ultimate. His new ultimate, while it's not very good, it doesn't really serve him any potency inside of the laning phase, and so now because Ryze is limited to having 3 offensive spells, technically his all-in ability is almost always going to be relatively the same, and it's going to be based on his ability to wither you down, rather than, being able to turn on his ultimate and chase people down. Also, because of his loss of the movement speed and all that other good stuff that his ulti granted, probably means that he may not end up going into top lane. It's not that he can't, I just think that it's much more likely that he ends up in the support or the mid role. The other problem is he lost the cooldown reduction that his ult used to grant. So what happens now with Ryze is I think that he goes back to being the old Ryze that used to build the Frozen Heart and the Spirit Visage. So he's going to go back to being a tanky Ryze, which isn't necessarily bad because that's going to synergize extremely well with his new ultimate. But we're going to have to see how he progresses in the meta, because right now I'm looking at it like he's going to be a mid lane champion or a support. But if he does end up taking the support path, I don't think that Riot will let that happen, and he'll ultimately be phased out into becoming a mid laner again somehow. Because he's one of those champions that they just sort of can't let go. There's a few champions in League that you may have noticed that if they fall out of the meta too long, Riot almost makes sure to buff them or change them in some way to keep them relevant. Some popular champions about that is like Lise, Zed, a champion that they just took out of the meta, but they're almost guaranteed to bring back, and maybe... I'm going to predict by patch 6.16, Kindred will be back. So there's my prediction right now. So we have 2 patches, and something is going to happen to Kindred to bring her back into the meta, because I feel like she's probably too much of a moneymaker. But anyways, that aside, let's go on to Leona. So Leona has some new interesting changes, and this is stuff that I had been following on the PBE. Okay, passive Sunlight. Damage goes from 20 to 140, removed. Now it goes 20 to 105, levels 1 through 18. So she loses 35 damage on her passive. The damage on her Q, she loses 30 now, which that scaling on it is kind of big. So she loses 10 at rank 1, and then she loses 15, and then she loses 30, and that's actually kind of big. The benefit, though, is generally Leona doesn't do this for burst damage. So the fact that her cooldown now is 9 to 5 scaling rather than 11 to 7, it's pretty big. Because that means with 40% CDR, the stun now is what is it, 1 second? Stun duration... Okay, so it's 1 second stun, and now the zenith is 1.5, so she's going to be able to probably stick to you and stun you a lot, especially if she gets Boots of Swiftness, or depending on like her runes and masteries. The Shield of Daybreak is going to be a lot stronger, and also I like the bonus range going from 30 to 50, because that's going to make her also a lot better in sticking to you, which is something that we talked about. So, W Eclipse, damage goes from 60 to 260 to 60 to 220. Not too big of a deal there. Again, Leona's not really meant to damage you. Her CC is pretty obnoxious, and I think that the changes to her stun on her cure is really good. And then on top of that, the root duration from Zenith Blade is also up 0.25 seconds. So, lots of buffs there. Mostly because of the cooldown. Now, Solar Flare, 150, 250, 350 to 100, 175, 250. After using Solar Flare, Leona gains incandescent. Wait, what? I've never said this word in my life. Incandescence. For 5 seconds. During that time, Leona's next 3, 4, 5 basic attacks gain plus 100 range, deal 30, 40, 50, plus 0.5 ability power, bonus magic damage, and apply Sunlight. I guess that's her passive. Okay, so her ulti is going to deal a lot more damage if she opens with it, which generally she does open with it. So all the damage that she's missing on her Q and her W, she's actually going to end up dealing more damage, I think, as long as she lands at least like 2 or 3 autos, which, if you do the combo correctly, you're going to RE auto Q auto So you're going to get a lot of auto attacks off. So looking at it, Leona actually has more burst than she had before, which we didn't know when we were just reading these spells. But now that we know that her R, when she has her ultimate, she's going to have a lot more burst than she had previously. But her oppression during the laning phase is going to be more so reliant on her stun ability. I think that this is actually really, really powerful for Jhin, for instance, because that means that you can really lock up your target pretty well. So Leona might come back also because of the buffs to Talisman of Ascension. So that's pretty good. Also, Sona getting changed definitely means that Leona can probably come back, because Leona lights up Sona pretty easy. Okay, so general aura radius 350 to 400. Surround sound aura duration no longer extended by up to 2 seconds when attacking allies. Okay, crescendo. Passive attack. Each rank of Crescendo amplifies Sona's auras, reduces Sona's basic ability cooldowns by 20, 30, 40%. Multiplies with... Wait, what? Does that mean that she gets 80% CDR? Wait. Wait. And then she almost gets like 80% CDR. Wait, what? I don't know if I'm reading this correctly, but if this is true, this is pretty oppressive, because right now one of the popular supports is Nami, and then obviously Soraka, and Sona does very well against both of them. But with Leona returning, that'll probably keep her in line. So I think that it's very interesting that there's a meta patch coming out where two supports are getting directly buffed, one of which really hard counters the other, and one of which does really well versus the current field of support champions. So that's kind of nice. Because I don't really know too much about how that crescendo's working exactly, I don't want to talk about it too much because it would be pretty ignorant of me. Damage on her Q, levels 1 through 18, is buffed. Diminuendo, damage reduction 20 to 25%. Damage reduction ratio 4% per... what is going on? Damage 40 to 200 to 40 to 160, okay. Area of perseverance, or Araya of perseverance, okay. Increased ability power ratio, so a 0.5 on ability power. Sona's maybe going to have 100 ability power at the very end, so that doesn't really do anything. So it's not going to affect her in the ways that you would expect something like a change like this to affect Echo when they nerfed his base ratios, so it's very different. Shield 35 to 115 scaling to 30 to 130 scaling. Shield ratio 0.3 ability power to 0.3 ability power, so you're probably going to get an extra 10 to 20 shield on her W. No longer increases healing by up to 50% based on the target's missing health. Okay, that's actually pretty problematic, but not the end of the world. E, Song of Clarity, self-movement speed 13 to 70% scaling to 16 to 20% non-decaying movement speed for 3 seconds. Lasts up to 4 additional seconds while Sona is out of combat. Aura movement speed ratio 4 per 1 per... Wow. Wow. Okay, well, Sona just got really, really, really big buffs, but don't just pick her instantly because she has a lot of bad matchups that can get countered. So she's going to be an interesting counter support pick, and I think because of the changes to Leona and Sona, and because of how heavy the changes are and how impactful they are on the lanes that they generally tend to be a part of, I think this can actually open up the possibility for red side using support as a counter pick, which generally has been frowned upon for like the last 4 splits globally, primarily because generally if you're red side you want to use the counter pick on either the top or mid lane or jungle. Not so much jungle lately because the jungle is pretty stable, but definitely top and mid. But with these changes to some of the supports, and also we're about to read Annie, maybe something happened to Annie because sometimes she can be flecked into support. If Tibbers targets enters Fog of War, Tibbers now continues passing the target's last known location. That's really big. Tibbers no longer forgets how to attack his target if crowd controlled. Okay. Fixed a bug where Tibbers couldn't be ordered to attack inhibitors of the Nexus. Okay, so these are pretty big bug changes. Fixed a bug where Tibbers could fail to go berserk if Annie gave him a command at the moment she died. Okay. These are pretty nice bug changes. The one thing that I will say is that if Tibbers enters the Fog of War, Tibbers now continues pathing. This is basically just a noob-friendly buff because really good Annie players would do this anyway. They would be, you know, telling Tibbers to go past the location as they were entering to the Fog of War. Okay, so Azir. So this is someone that is extremely fragile. And what I mean by extremely fragile is because his kit is so good, what ends up happening is If his numbers are just good enough, he will always see pro play because his kit is undeniably too strong. If his numbers are too bad by even the slightest fraction, it means that he's not actually viable. And thus enters the problem where it's extremely, extremely difficult to balance. Some other champions that, might come to mind for this is the old school Kassadin, the old school Ryze, even the last pre-work Ryze. Illaoi as well. So anyways, W or Ryze, soldier damage, still 50 to 170 at levels 1 through 18, but scales worse from levels 1 to 11. So his impact early on is definitely less. Scaling increase from levels 14 to 18 to catch back up. Soldier vision range, 575 to 350. That is a little bit problematic, but it's not going to be the end of the world. These, I think, are still very fair balance changes, especially because Azir tends to have a very strong wake-up in the later stages of the game, and when his wake-up does start beginning, that generally tends to be around level 12, which is when the enhanced scaling comes back in. So I actually think this is a very fair balance, and I think that Riot actually did something very, very correct in this regard. So, Fiora, trash champion. Anyways, passive heals more, Q scaling increase to early levels. Let's see, Duelist Stance, health on Vital Hit, 20 to 110 at levels 1 through 18, 30 to 115 at levels 1 to 18. So this probably means that Fiora is going to heal herself an extra 50 to 70 during laning phase, which is pretty big. So basically she got half a potion during laning phase, and then obviously at the later stages it's not going to matter too much. She'll probably get an extra 50 HP or something during a team fight, 50 to 75 HP during an extended team fight if it's like 40 or 50 minutes, so that's fine. Illaoi, Q indicator, is now more accurate for the enemy. That's cool. Tentacool. You get it? Tentacruel. Okay, Pokemon Go. Anyways, Lee Sin, W shield increased. W safeguard, 40 to 200 scaling to 40 to 280 scaling. This is nice, but this isn't the type of change that Lee needs to make himself viable, especially because the other junglers just basically do too much, and they do a lot of similar things that Lee used to be able to get away with. One of the reasons that Lee Sin used to be so good, and he was even called like the king of the jungle or the prince of the jungle, was because a lot of champions that had yet to come out did not have ways to move around the map that he did, and the ones that did, such as like Vi and Jarvan 4, Gragas was not yet a jungler, made it so that Lee Sin's mobility was extremely difficult to keep up with, and generally, if you look back at Season 3 or Season 4, historically, a lot of junglers had to go Moby boots in order to keep up with Lee Sin, who might have just been able to use a Tier 1 boot. So, Lee Sin's problems are more so centered in the meta's champions, and champions that have been released, rather than directly his numbers. He's still always going to be viable if you're really good at him, but the fact of the matter is there's probably less than 15 people in the world that can maybe play him at a professional level, and there's probably less than maybe 100 that can play him at a challenger level, and that's including every single server, Ionia, Korea, Garena, NA, EU West, etc. So, anyways, Lux, passive damage up, Q damage down. So she's going to be rewarded for proccing her passive, okay, so she gets a pretty big buff. She gets an extra 36 damage at level 18 on her auto attack. I don't know exactly how the scaling works, but she's losing 10 damage at the intermittent level. So I guess she's nerfed early on, unless she's proccing her passive via E or something, but she's buffed considerably later on, so that's nice. Malzahar, oh no, my baby. Movement speed and attack range down. So movement speed 340 to 335. Not the end of the world, but it is a little bit problematic because he's a champion that definitely benefits from his ability to space very well and position superior to his opponents during dances and team fights, so this does affect him. Basic attack range, 550 to 500. That's a bitch. That's really, really problematic because this affects his ability to... Like, one of Malzahar's problems right now is when he goes up against Azir, he's like 70-30 until Azir gets his first item. When he goes up against Viktor, likewise, he's like 70-30 until Viktor gets the Hex Core augmentation. And then the matchup becomes pretty brutal, generally favoring Viktor like 30-70, Malzahar being the 30. It's not so bad. Malzahar can still push and he can keep up with Viktor, but it's definitely a problematic matchup, and losing the attack range is definitely going to hurt his ability to trade with the big two. So, pretty okay balance changes, but I don't really like it considering there's a lot of counters to Malzahar that exist. You can pick Tahm Kench top lane, or you can pick Tahm Kench support, Tahm Kench jungle, to basically stop him dead. Then you don't even really need to invest into QSS, and Malzahar has a very, very slow windup. He does have a lot of power when he gets the Morellonomicon, mostly because of his cooldowns and because of his objective control inside of the Voidlings, but there are a lot of counters and team comps that exist that ultimately shut him down. He is very close to a versus all champion, but the things that are preventing him from being a versus all is actually so powerful that it can just stop him dead. So I don't like the changes, but I think that it affects solo queue a lot, not so much competitive. Okay, so Poppy passive. Passive cooldown down and damage down. Passive shield and W increased. Okay. Iron Ambassador, 18 to 10 seconds scaling at levels 1, 7, 13 to 16 to 10 seconds at levels 1, 7, 13. So a little 2-second buff on our Iron Ambassador. I don't think that's going to really make her viable because the top lane champions right now tend to be Gnar, Gangplank, Shen, Aurelia, Trundle, and I think that's the current meta, and Tahm Kench. So she doesn't really have a lot of good matchups right now, and even getting this passive change isn't really going to help her, especially because she's losing the damage, which is going to be pretty big against, trading against these people. 20% of Poppy's maximum health at all ranks. Wow, that's pretty big, actually. Yeah, 50, it's changed from 15.17.5 to 20%. So that's really, really, really big late game. Steadfast Presence, 27 to 35% scaling to 32 to 4. Wow, that's really big. She can be viable in some scenarios. Also, you can use lane swaps to make her effective. Maybe this will bring Poppy back. I don't think it will, but these are definitely buffs in the right direction. Okay, Rek'Sai. W's cooldown on tracking individual targets up. Oh, man. That's a very awkward nerf. Okay, Tremor Sense. 0.75 to 1. It just basically means that you have to be more aware of where they're going. It's not the worst nerf, but you're probably definitely going to feel it if you're a Rek'Sai main. Okay, Taliyah. W cooldown up and cast lockout removed E damage down. Wow, okay. Seismic shove 16 to 8 seconds to 16 to 12. Wow, that's brutal. Cast to place, recast to direct, vector casting. Okay, so it's equal to Rumble's Equalizer and Viktor's Laser. Taliyah is no longer locked out of casting other spells for 0.55 seconds after casting. Okay, that's actually kind of clean, but the cooldown is pretty big, so that's definitely going to hurt her. Unraveled Earth, fall-off damage. Each mine deals 15% less damage than the last when detonating on the same target.
And Taliyah is really hard.
Viktor. Okay, Hexcore MK 1 cost 1,000 gold to 1,250 gold. This is pretty big. Generally, the way that Victors play out their laning phase is they either farm to 1,300 gold to get the boots plus the Hexcore upgrade. Generally, it's 1,350, which usually occurs around the 730 mark if they're hitting pretty good CS. But this changes things up because this also now gives the ability to hard trade against Viktor earlier on, and in matchups where Viktor is actually at a disadvantage and he ends up getting shoved backwards, it's going to make it that much more painful if he goes into the double Dorons with boots early on, because that's really going to delay his impact and his power spike in the laning phase. So, also mentioning Malzahar, this is going to help him out a lot. I'm speaking about Malzahar, because any sort of nerf to Viktor's Hexcore upgrade is very, very problematic. This also means that if Viktor falls behind, he falls really far behind in the early stages in terms of getting ganked at like level 2 or 3. Okay, Yasuo. Okay, there's a lot of bug fixes. Fixed a bug where Still Tempest wasn't always critically striking when Yasuo had 100% crit. Okay, Windwall no longer fails to block projectiles in the instant it was cast, if cast at the same time Yasuo would, okay. Alright, so lots of just bug fixes. Clown Drake. Stacks grant more movement speed. Alright, so 15, 30, 45 to 25, 50, 75. Nope. It's still only going to be good if you get 2 dragons, or 2 cloud dragons, but why would you want to, praying for 2 cloud dragons is almost always going to be worse than any other of the other 2 dragons, but it is important that at least now it will be a little okay if you do get 2. Getting 3 is nice, but the fact that it takes 18 minutes to do it is pretty much useless. Okay, so these are changes to Twisted tree line. Cooldown pings. So they added cooldown pings. That's pretty nice, but people don't really pay attention to chat anyway. Mastery grade calculations for supports will be adjusted. Okay, that doesn't matter too much. Bug fixes. Let's just take a quick look at them. Garden of Thorns no longer reactivates while Zyra is recalling in brush, giving away her location. Braum no longer instantly dies if he tries to block Baron Nashor's acid shot with the E unbreakable at the exact wrong moment. When Darius E apprehend pulls enemies over walls, and no longer chest bumps them back to the side. Okay, that's pretty good. Graves is no longer briefly stunned if the enemy tries to displace him as he casts R. Okay. Graves W smoke screen no longer fizzles if cast immediately before Graves fires the second base, but that's pretty big. Fixed a bug where the active effect of Hextech GLP 800 wasn't always being properly reduced by Sightstone's active. Okay, that doesn't really matter. Health bars for Aetherwind Kale, our Inquisitor, and Riot Kale have been bumped up to match their height on Kale's other skins. Okay. Magical Journey, Pathing Indicate. Okay. Removed a few seam lines. Okay. Alright, and I guess that's it. And so the upcoming skins are Pool Party Fiora, Pool Party Misfortune, and Pool Party Taric. And I guess that's it. So that is it for patch 6.14 rundown. I think that the biggest changes is Viktor's impact in competitive will be a little bit stunted, and maybe there's a little bit more plays that can be used against him now. Taliyah nerfs, I think, are they're not really warranted. But, you know, what can you do? Rek'Sai nerfs is fair. Malzahar nerf is fair. Poppy's interesting. Maybe she can come in via lane swaps. Lux is still going to be terrible. Lee Sin's still not going to be useful. Fiora is still going to be pretty much trash. She doesn't have any good matchups. Azir balance, I think, is actually on point by Riot. The anti-buffs are nice, but it's only going to affect solo queue. I think that the biggest points is Leona and Sona might actually be viable counter picks on red side now in competitive, and it's very interesting to have them back. And then again, we're going to see if Ryze is a mid or a support lane champion. So that is it for the patch 6.14 rundown, and I hope that you enjoyed that.